Welcome to SEC Football Live National Championship Edition, or at least semifinal edition, brought to you, of course, by ML Rose. 6 great locations, soon to be 7, all over the mid-state area in Middle Tennessee and Nashville. That is Stephen Godfrey. I am Braden Gall. Texas is done. Penn State is done. Ohio State and Notre Dame in an all-Midwest championship game. We are going to discuss Brian Kelly today on the show because, yes, Marcus Freeman being extremely likable and making Notre Dame likable is a conversation about Brian Kelly. So we're going to do that a little bit later on. We'll talk about Texas and Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian and the red zone play calling and the 2 games that we just watched, which were phenomenal football games just from a entertainment standpoint. I enjoyed them both thoroughly. Had a great time watching both those games. We'll discuss the format. Carson Beck is a Miami Hurricane. We'll discuss that as well. What's Quinn Ewers' legacy? I think is an interesting question. I know legacies is kind of a cliche question, but I do find him as a character in this story to be really, really interesting and fascinating. So if you're in Nashville, though, Godfrey, and you want to come by and hang out, I think we're going to swing by Saturday night to watch some NFL playoff football at ML Rose on Charlotte Avenue. So if you want to come grab a beer or a burger or some of the best ranch dipping sauces in the city, come on by. So there you go. ML Rose, everybody.
Still putting that ranch. Like your ranch is that's the flourish on the ad read.
It is. You gotta look when somebody does something great,
very pro ranch.
Yeah. Well, and look, people like I'm from Wisconsin originally. I lived in Illinois, Indiana, and Connecticut before moving south of the Mason-Dixon line for the last 35 years of my life. But I am grits, sweet tea, and ranch dressing, which is how I know I've converted to a Southerner officially over the last 35 years. Everything is better with ranch on it. It's just true.
I'm not even that big on ranch, but I understand its importance in the pantheon.
Yeah. Like pizza, ranch. I'll dip it in ranch,
okay.
Pepperoni pizza in ranch.
Choice. Okay. All right. Not here to judge.
But most importantly, good waffle fries from a local restaurant owned by local businesses and local people that support the community like an ML Rose. That's the way to go. All right, let me ask you this about the format first before we get into the specifics of the games, the championship, all the other what does it mean aspects of these 2 games, Godfrey. And if you're watching on Twitter, or if you're watching on Twitter, please retweet, share the show, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, notifications turned on, that whole deal. If you want to jump into the comment section, please do so. We'll have time. But Bo says, I know you're a Packers fan. How about Edgerrin Cooper now? Look at that. I didn't expect an Edgerrin Cooper question right out of the gate on the college football show. No, I was a big Edge Cooper fan in college. I was very happy that they drafted him, and now he's flourishing as a middle linebacker after Quay Walker got hurt. 2 SEC linebackers there. So there you go. I want to ask you about the format. I think Ohio State is going to be a stand-in for a conversation this offseason about sort of what do we want the playoff to do for us. Are we okay with teams that lose a couple times, that are super talented, that don't make the championship format, whether it was 2 in the BCS or 4? There's thought that Notre Dame and Ohio State would have been ranked probably 4 and 5 or 5 and 6, and maybe neither of them make a 14 playoff. I would have had Ohio State in the top 4 if I was on the committee personally. So I don't think that holds as much water with Ohio State, but it probably does with Notre Dame. But we ended up with 2 great semifinals. I think we have 2 worthy teams playing in the championship game. We had a phenomenal Arizona State game. I thought the Boise State-Penn State game was pretty good too. Like we had good football, and the regular season mattered more to more people for longer. With all of that context, Godfrey, do you think that the format, the changes, sort of delivered us what we should have, what we deserve, what it's supposed to do? Did it do its job?
Yeah, I think it did its job as best it could. I definitely think that some refinement and some tweaking that we've talked about on a lot of the other shows, like leading in, especially those last 2 weeks of, first it was who's going to get in, who's going to get out. Then it was, all right, do we love this positioning? What about the reseeding factor? What about the 1 through 4, the bye factor? So without going and redoing all of those discussions and debates, I'm satisfied on the whole. I think everything's kind of fine. And I don't make, we say something's fine. It's not, you're not giving it a ringing endorsement. Those 2 games that we just saw were great games. I thought they were even for the most part, even though they were, I think, identifiably superior teams, mainly more so in Ohio State versus Texas. I thought a casual fan could access, understand, and really enjoy what was happening, starting all the way back at the beginning. And I think most of those conversations that we've already put to bed would have looked so much more different if Ohio State didn't lose to Michigan. We're going to have a completely different conversation, and things are going to feel a lot more normal to see Ohio State just like destroying everyone up through the bracket to get to this point. And they're probably going to do the same thing to Notre Dame on Monday night, or a week from Monday night. That's crazy. But I don't have any major issues here. I also think that this is a dangerous thing to do because I've warned you against it. You don't want to speak for the entire collective, the zeitgeist of like everyone is saying or people are saying. That's not something that you can qualify or quantify. But I think a lot of the debate kind of died down once the game started. Two of the three SEC teams that didn't get in, that people really kind of rallied around, did not look good in their bowl and they lost. And I kind of think the situation just sorted itself out. I also think Penn State's performance specifically in the, I would say more on the defensive side of the ball, has lessened the anger about, well, why in the world was SMU in? Would any of the three SEC teams played a better or closer game in Happy Valley? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But I think Penn State wins that game. That's the one team that's so funny because like I couldn't trust them on offense all season, even though they were doing things like there was nothing to argue against. I think you kind of had that feeling that they're not imposter, but something wasn't working here. And then sure enough, it kind of bites them in the most significant time possible. But you can't take away from their defensive performance. You can't take away from the overall team talent. Like I'm overall, I'm fine. I'm good.
I am too. I'm curious, like, we got two great semifinals, something that we didn't really ever get in the 4-team era, but we got really good championship.
Not simultaneously. Yeah.
Right. But we got really good championship games a lot of times. Like sometimes LSU dominated, or sometimes Clemson destroyed Alabama, or sometimes, like there were times when there were blowouts. I am curious to think that, and I think this it's a really interesting element to the bracket, which is that we now get invested as fans in the sport in stories about things, players, coaches, backstory, communities, whatever. But like the casual fan can be invested in that for weeks now, instead of no games happening for 45 days and you're trying to get invested in stuff that you're kind of like, sure, there are really good stories that people are writing about, this player or that coach's journey or this, fan, or like really cool feature stories by good reporters. But I think now you get people watching 3 straight Ohio State games and there's a story built up around that. There's 3 straight Notre Dame games, 3 straight Texas games. You get all these stories now that the casual fan kind of gets invested in. And I do believe that having Notre Dame, Ohio State, Texas, and Penn State play a bunch of games to get to this point, I do believe that we got mostly their best effort in those 2 games. All 4 teams I thought played pretty well. Not like maybe elite, but like you have to be playing well to get through any bracket.
Yeah.
And so by definition, you don't have a team that's like, again, I looked at this. I couldn't believe the number, but the 2012, because we're going to talk about Brian Kelly, 2012 Notre Dame, Alabama, 42-17, total blowout. Notre Dame destroyed. They stopped playing on November 24th.
Right.
And like that's insane.
And then that game was January
like
6th,
8th
7th?
or whatever. Yeah. That's an insane amount of time to have nothing happen in a sport. Like it's just nuts. Sure. So I do think that means we're going to get teams that are playing at their best. You're going to kind of cull the field. And so semifinals should be very good. I think that we might end up with something bad next Monday because I don't think Notre Dame particularly matches up well with Ohio State. But
they're also very injured.
They are. Here's the other thing. This is not an SEC take at all. Texas and Ohio State were the best 2 teams left in the tournament, and they do things on offense that the other 2 teams just simply cannot. Like I think all the defenses are pretty even, pretty good. All 4 teams are pretty talented, relatively equally. I just think that the offenses for Ohio State in particular, and then a little bit lesser so, but with Texas, they just can do things that, Notre Dame had 1 shot down the field and it worked. Like they just can't go, like, no, not a single receiver caught a pass for Penn State. That's a problem. But I don't love that this is how I feel, but it's how I feel. I thought I watched the national championship game last night.
I definitely didn't feel that. I actually kind of liked the way the bracket shook out because I was most suspect of Texas of the remaining 4. Yes, I had them a distant 4 because of the defensive issues that they had in their previous 2 games. And then honestly, man, my God,
they played great.
As a lifelong Atlanta Falcons fan who can recall individual like down and distance situations, Steve Sarkisian's red zone play calling.
We'll get there.
Came back like a monster from a horror film. And I'm certainly not going to stand up here and go, oh, well, yeah, I definitely saw that coming. You do know that Sark is good for that about once a year of just inexplicably bad sort of overthinking situations in obvious red zone like scenarios.
That was all season though.
Broke like it was the easiest lead to write. That was funny too. Like get up this morning and read the gamers from everyone across the industry of all sorts of shapes and forms. It was like, yeah, they duffed the final seconds, especially because you're coming off of 2 consecutive PI calls.
Which by the way,
I'm really good with Notre Dame has become more likable than they ever have been. I know we're going to talk about that in a second. I really like the matchup. If you talked about narrative and character defining and storylines that people can latch onto. I think in that way, it's the best possible title game we could have received from the Final Four.
I agree. I totally agree with that.
I didn't when it was tied at 14. I thought, okay, Texas certainly has enough talent on the field, but would probably still need an assist from those kind of wonky or Chip Kelly moments, like a cousin to the Steve Sarkisian moments as play caller, I guess. But I'm happy with what we've got. And look, I don't think anybody like Penn State would have got we'd be talking. I think the spread's it opened to 10 or something. Yeah. We'd be talking about Penn State the exact same way because we've already seen that game against Ohio State. I think it might actually be worse because the speed and the talent of Ohio State's defense, they were getting pressure and still dropping into zone. They were doing stuff that was just it was horrific because it was individual talent. And that's what a $20 million payroll gets you.
Yeah. No, Ohio State's the best team. I said going into the Tennessee game, I will probably pick Ohio State to win the whole thing. I think you're underselling Texas a little bit, especially when you look at the recruiting rankings, the portal rankings, the 4- and 5-star blue chip ratios. Penn State was a distant fourth from the talent perspective, roughly.
Yeah, but who cares? That's not the point anymore. It's about the
game.
No,
it's not.
And I will say this about.
Well, let me hang on one second on the red zone thing because it's not once a year. I think that's why the lead is so easy to write. It's not once a year for this team, for this Texas team. They were 54th in the nation in touchdown percentage in the red zone this year overall. And they were 101st in the nation in red zone conversions for the season. This is a bad red zone team the entire year.
But he's a bad red zone coach. So you can go back and look at his NFL stats. You can go back and look at his USC stats. He's good for this. They rack up a lot of yards. Spencer Hall wrote about this at Channel 6. They rack up a lot of yards by design. And then sort of by character, his signature is to do cutesy stuff in the red zone. Kind of always have, kind of always will. I will say this. They're
well, and who's number 2 in red zone outside. And who's number 2 in red zone defense all year in the entire country.
Lost to?
Yeah, that got the historically great number 2 in red zone defense and number 2 in touchdown red zone defense. They had given up 15 total touchdowns in the red zone the entire season, which is number 1 in the nation. Ohio State Buckeyes, one of the greatest goal line stands in the history of goal lines, because they got the 2 penalties like that. They got 2. That's why it was like that.
Wait. You mean why Texas?
No, it was one of the greatest goal line stands ever because Ohio State was called
to the 2 hand behind their back.
2 PIs, right? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, they tied a hand behind their back. At this point, it's like a foot, right? It's a foot to go. For them to then switch out of the big package, because they had a defensive lineman in at one point, and I think 2 defensive linemen in to go heavy, whatever their version of heavy is. And they switched out because they were like, you know what? And they kind of called it. Fowler's not much of a hardcore scheme guy, but in the play call, he's just like, hey, look, probably not going to work line on line here. And then it didn't. And then they went and they said, all right, we're going to do a perimeter rush. And that was embarrassing. The penetration that they were able to get was embarrassing on individual matchups. I don't care about rankings anymore because of this. Rankings are going to be really, really flawed metric for a while until we can figure out how to better create them. Going in, I also think the combination of the amount of games played is creating a second season. I think Penn State benefited tremendously from the second season. Ohio State obviously benefits the most for a very large maize and blue reason. This second season is going to define the sport. It doesn't mean that the regular season is lesser than, because you got to get to the dance, right? It's still only 12 slots. There's still a lot of work you have to do. You have to really, in the Power 2 conferences, survive more than anything else. Yes, I know there was a much more lopsided dominance in one conference, and there was much more of a flattened out kind of upper middle class, but no truly rich programs this year in the South. Those things can ebb and flow depending on,
and they will,
a couple quarterbacks, a couple players, et cetera. I wouldn't worry so much about that. what I think we're seeing now is a pro-like mentality. You have to then almost not reinvent yourself at all, but I definitely think in Ohio State's case and Penn State's case, and maybe there's something for an SEC team to learn here, you played so much football this month. Like, you played so much. I mean, well, I mean, actually, all 4 of the teams were in the first round, but like, you played so much football this month. I don't think Texas got better as they went, and I think Ohio.
You don't think
State
that was their? You don't think that was their better game, their best game of the 3 in the tournament? I think it was, actually. Defensively, I think it was. Defensively, it was their,
defensively it was, because I was so critical of the first 2 games defensively. So I guess you're right about that. I don't think it was their best offensive game. I think they kind of got smoked. I mean,
Ohio State's so good.
Minutes of that game, I was like, oh, this is gonna.
Ohio State's so good. Like, that's Ohio State's so good on defense. Every single game since the beginning, they've been this good. And so
I played this game with Tennessee.
I think it was their best.
I played this game with Tennessee graduate Holly Anderson about. Let's just for the SEC's sake, let's flip Ohio State, Michigan, which is sort of like everyone's brain outside of Ann Arbor wants to do that. Tennessee goes a lot further, I think, potentially. I think they have a better window. The thing it doesn't solve for, to go back for a second, because I did have this written down as something I want to talk about. People are still going to get upset because the combination of the buys and the seedings, Penn State, even if it's South Carolina or something, and they go in and they still win by 2 scores, they're still seeing a Boise team that they're more talented than in almost every position in that second game, with Boise as the host in the Fiesta. Penn State definitely. It was weird because like I kind of shed a lot of that. Well, Penn State, benefited from the road. Penn State, easiest path through the bracket. They played well enough to win against Notre Dame. They played well enough to win it. I mean, in every way, shape, and form. I don't think it was like, oh, imposter or fraudulent at all.
No, not at all.
The wide receiver stat is not great. But I've also seen Alabama teams look damn near that reductive in the pre-Kiffin Saban era, when
15 years ago,
AJ McCarron, McElroy eras.
That's great. That's great in 2010, 11, and 12. James Franklin is coaching in 2025. I just want to point that out. So I want to go to Texas real fast, because I do think there's a conversation. There's a big conversation about what Ohio State this year represents and what the playoff has allowed to happen, which I think a lot of Big Ten and SEC schools would benefit from over the years moving forward, or in the past. There's a conversation about that, and I think we as a collective group of fans and media need to sort of, I think, have a smart conversation in the offseason about that. This was obviously going to happen. A team with elite players who is extraordinarily talented, that maybe just slipped up once or twice in the regular season, that never would have had a chance to win a championship in a previous format, now has an opportunity to right that wrong in a playoff format where they get in. There's a lot of SEC teams that, I think Georgia last year would have gone on a really deep run and probably played Michigan in the championship game had that happen. I could point to a lot of Ohio State teams over the years. 98 Ohio State, 2015 Ohio State. Like, you can point to a lot of great teams. Yeah. SEC Big Ten power programs. USC had some of those teams. Auburn in 04. Like, we can go down the list of a lot of great teams that are really, really talented, that slipped up and didn't get into the format because of the format, and then therefore would have a chance to do what Ohio State's doing. And that this is the first time we've ever had that. And I think it's okay for us to have a conversation about, well, do we like that? Is that what we want? I'm okay with it because we have good football games and the regular season's better and more people are involved. But we'll see. I want to talk Quinn Ewers real fast, though, because I looked at, I think, even his last 5 games, because I think there's a lot of conversation about, like, oh, Texas didn't play anybody this year, which is, again, kind of a Twitter thing. But their last 5 games at Texas A&M, elite defense, not a great offense, Georgia in the SEC championship game, and then Clemson, Arizona State, and Ohio State. That's as good a test in a 5-game stretch. Only one of those games was at home. But I think these 5 games are sort of a microcosm of who Quinn Ewers is, which is, I don't think they went 3-2 of those games. The 2 games they lost, Georgia and Ohio State, I don't think it was Quinn Ewers' fault that they lost them. I think he was a big part of why they won the other 3. He's going to finish largely top 3 in every major statistical category in the history of Texas football. He's going to be behind Colt McCoy and Vince Young. Should this be the end of his Texas career? He's number 3 in yards right now, over 9,000 yards passing. And in our childhoods, Godfrey, that would be an elite Hall of Fame-ish kind of quarterback, over 9,000 yards in the 90s. Number 3 in total touchdowns. He's got over 76 total touchdowns. He's been the starting. Now, he's missed some of these games for injury, but he was the starting quarterback for 3 years at Texas. That's a 33-10 record with 2 trips to the national semifinal, a Big 12 championship, and an SEC championship game appearance. He threw for 276 yards per game in these last 5 games, 8 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. 2 of those interceptions weren't his fault. 63% completion percentage, over 8 yards per attempt for his career. When I say Quinn Ewers, I feel like this 3-2 record and almost getting to the championship game and being a very good player, but not quite good enough is how I'm sort of going to remember him. Is that fair? Is that unfair? Where do you fall on sort of the Quinn Ewers career conversation?
I think if you're a Texas fan, you should not feel ashamed or weird about looking back on him with a tremendous amount of fondness. Inside of those stats are a lot of wins that probably would not have happened in all the other Texas eras since we've been doing this job or since we've been paying attention to this sport. Because look, short of 05 and maybe the 09 season, Texas is a woefully inconsistent team relative to its talent and what it's afforded financially and everything else, both pre and post NIL. And I don't get that feeling anymore. I can be highly critical of Sark as a play caller. The thing that's a constant, it's consistent. The thing that shocked me and really the dynamic change around, I think that Sark has displayed is they made a very consistent football program. And Texas fans, I think there's some in the chat right now. I wonder if they would agree with me.
But Bo's an A&M fan.
Okay. Well, sorry. Oh, that's why. Okay. I see he's caping. Gotcha. I'm kind of just, I'm not trying to hand out participation ribbons here, but I think Ewers I think the affection is conditional upon eventually Texas winning a national title in the next 5 years. Totally possible. It's Arch's team.
Absolutely.
They're doing everything right. I think they're going to operate along the lines of the best programs in the country. I think they're going to operate exactly like Ohio State in terms of what they do in high school and NIL and portal, et cetera. So if that happens and they're on a trajectory, I think the hardest thing for Texas to admit, and maybe they don't outside of non-Texas circles like us, is that they just always tripped over themselves. That's a super PG way for me to say that. And you can't really look at the Ewers era and say, gosh, this feels like the missed chances with Colt McCoy, or, this feels like those years
on the goal line twice, on the goal line or in the red zone to score a touchdown to go to potentially the national championship
completely.
Twice. No, I don't disagree with you. Eddie said here. Let's expand on. I think what Eddie's comment is
that's a great comment. Yeah,
Ewers was the catalyst for Texas football revival, and here's what I started thinking in my head as soon as I saw that comment. And actually, I was thinking this before Eddie mentioned that. Hendon Hooker will be credited if Tennessee goes on to do very good things over the course of the next 15 years, and they're a constant program, sort of near the top of the conference and around the playoff. I'm not talking about winning a championship, but Hendon Hooker with Josh Heupel as that player will be credited with sort of reviving Tennessee. I think Chris Leak, all of his personal decisions after football notwithstanding, a career player who is sort of the one who wins the national championship before Tebow takes him to elite levels. Chris Leak sort of reestablished the Florida brand. I think there are guys that are like this in our sport I think McElroy is that way for Alabama. He just happened to have Nick Saban and an elite roster, but McElroy is the guy who takes over and sort of elevates Alabama back to where Alabama has been, for the last 15 years. I think that's what Quinn Ewers should be viewed as, because I agree. Texas is not going anywhere as long as the structure is what it is. And it doesn't mean they're going to win a national championship. For fun, by the way, I was looking at all the historical numbers for Texas quarterbacks. Do you know who has the high any quarterback over like 50 attempts, like a player who actually played, right? Not the guy who had like 4 pass attempts in like one game one time. But actual quarterback. Do you know who has the highest quarterback rating and yards per attempt in Texas football history of anybody?
Please say it's like Chance Mock.
Strangely enough, Casey Thompson is very highly rated in all these different stats, but that's not who it is. Number 1 in yards per attempt and quarterback rating in Texas football history of any player over 50 attempts as a quarterback, Arch Manning. I just think that's funny. I just think it's
kind
funny.
of like a lies and statistics.
Of course it is. Of course, he's only thrown the ball. He's only thrown like 100 passes, but like I just thought that was funny that I was looking at the career numbers trying to find out where Ewers is, and literally like number 1 on those 2 lists happens to be the guy that everyone's excited about next year. So
when Arch was coming down to Georgia and Texas. We've talked about this on the show before, and I drew the ire of Georgia fans, which, by the way, I was right about your offense.
Stop.
And your quarterback just left for Miami.
Which is a very exciting offense, by the way.
The decision, I think, hinged on all the things I've already talked about: scheme, philosophy, and offensive culture. But Ewers was the representation of the concept. It's the proof of concepts. My favorite term in college football. Mm-hmm. Think about and maybe, I don't know, you and I both went to Manning SEC schools, so we know that family operates like a ball. I mean, that family operates like a gang, and you have to convince them in a very professional sort of way in that recruiting process. And I think Ewers was sort of the case study,
a part of it. Yeah.
And I think the confidence in the development of Ewers and his performance to that point and where he was headed. And I'm going to be honest with you, I also think the fact that they kind of leveled with Manning, the Manning camp in that process, and said, hey, we're not, but in any way, shape, or form, going to guarantee you anything coming in as a freshman. In fact, they didn't. Right? He's been a utility quarterback, but it's not 1-to-1 with like a Leak Tebow. But I do think that Ewers it sucks for him because no championship, right?
Yep. McElroy and Leak both got a championship, exactly. For example.
I don't know if I'd throw McElroy in there or not, because there's, like, to me, to go to like McElroy to McCarron.
But you can't put John Parker. John Parker Wilson was the starting quarterback in 2007, and you can't use John Parker Wilson as the elevator. McElroy was the guy who elevated the program.
John Parker Wilson was the survivor.
Right.
I think that I think if Texas can ascend and they can start to sort of rebuild their confidence, similar to I know this doesn't work and people are going to get mad, but like Tennessee found its confidence and its calmness in the last year or two. It's after 20 odd years of this nonsense. Texas is looking for that on a national title level, because they haven't had the pitfalls that Tennessee has per se, but they've had a similar version of the same identity crisis. I really feel like if Texas wins a national championship, there's going to be at that parade a sort of a moment and a shout out to like the guys who got us here, and that's going to be yours.
Yeah, I agree. Taff, the safety, Taff. He's going to be like one of those guys too, right?
Absolutely.
Walk on, who sort of helped them win so many games in 2 years. Those are the guys that kind of get. And honestly, that's the beauty of the game. Like, those are the players that don't win championships that get credit for building a team, building a culture, building a university. Those are great stories.
But I mean, there's a lot of that in 2007 Bama. There's a lot of that in the 6 and 7 Georgia team. Can't remember.
2016. Yeah, they lost to like Vanderbilt that year, and
there's a lot of that. Again, we're talking about a team that's been to the semifinals twice, so we're not talking about the same thing. This is just more of an ideological sort of feel. This is about the feelings, and I do think they'll look back on him fondly if they can ever get to the summit as the guy who bridged the way. And again, I think the consistency of Texas now is at a level I've never seen it, because I'm going to be honest with you, Vince was a 2-year phenomenon. Calm down about it. Also, nostalgia is a poison. This is the best version of Texas we've ever seen.
They got lucky. They went right from Young to Colt McCoy, like, directly.
Yes,
that was. I think there might have been 1 year. There might have been 1 year in there, but they went basically for 1-to-1.
Colt competed with somebody who wasn't Vince to win that job.
Now I got to look it up. Hang on.
My best friend that I lived with in college and lived with in Nashville when I moved here is a diehard. He's from Pflugerville. He's a diehard Texas fan, and I remember I had to watch all these games.
They went Colt started 13 games in 2007, the year.
No, but I mean, he beat. I'm saying they brought someone in
him to, because 2006 would have been the last year. No, he started in 2006. Jevin Sneed was brought in from Ole Miss. Ole Miss, that's right.
He goes, yeah. I knew there was somebody. Yeah.
No, good calling you. I forgot about old Jevin Sneed. Yeah, that's right. No, Colt McCoy started. That's where the reason Colt McCoy has all the records he has is that he started like 48 games or whatever. So, all right, I do believe
he doesn't drink soda. And he says his prayers.
I don't drink soda, and
his roommate. Jordan Shipley. Did you know his roommate was Jordan Shipley?
I did know his roommate was Jordan
Did you guys know that?
I know that Quinn Ewers' roommate was Jack Sawyer. I know that. We all know that. Great call by Fowler, by the way, to pull that out in the moment. Really good job.
Roger Sherman had a great joke last night that Roger Sherman, formerly of The Ringer, he was like, it's so ironic that Texas is undone by a college roommate story. which is a deep cut to like blog era college football because good God, did we not stop hearing about those roommates?
Yes, we did. I just think Ewers I think these last 5 games is sort of an embodiment of all of it, like really close to a championship, really quality, pretty good play in clutch situations by Ewers, just not good enough to win the whole thing. Not good enough to, even though he threw the ball like 48 times for almost 400 yards against Georgia in a very big time championship game, SEC championship game. It's just not enough, right? They get into overtime, not enough. And they beat, really good game against Clemson, really great game against Arizona State. And honestly, 283 and 2. Like the play calls to Blue with the all-out blitz coming in his face to dump it off to the running backs. Those were great plays by Quinn Ewers in the offense. And so you I just think
that's why you're damned in the biblical sense with Sark, is that Sark,
he's so good sometimes. It's
correctly identifies all the horrible things that are happening in the first 3 drives. And then always been a good guy always been good with screens. Correctly identifies the fact like, oh, dude, we are getting whipped. He has no time. We can't you were seeing a lot of like anything from a post, anything that was a deep crosser, it couldn't develop because they were getting to him too fast. So you're like, they got to screen. And then he starts screening really creatively.
Yeah.
So you want to give Sark his flowers once or twice a game because you're like, oh, Jesus, like, man, they got out of 2nd and 20 or, whatever the situation is. You're like, damn. And then when the target's this big is when Sark historically
when he turns around, he blindfolds it and tries to throw it over his shoulder like the guy at the bar playing darts.
Yes.
I will say I do think I think Wingo is going to be a great player. He is a really good athlete. He is going to be a really good player. Isaiah Bond has had really great moments at times. I don't think the receivers did him any favors last night. I think the receivers for Texas did not play a particularly good game on a few really critical situations in the second half. In particular, the 3rd and 8, where Wingo doesn't stem properly and he doesn't like. There's some moments like there's a back shoulder fade that Quinn wants to throw one time during the game. There's the drop by Bond over the middle where he jumps for no reason at all. Like the receivers could have been very good last night and made some mistakes and didn't help out Ewers in some of those key spots. So either way, I thought it was Texas's best game of the playoff. I thought it was the best defensive showing against Ohio State. This version, the second season of Ohio State, and I don't think.
I know you want to move on, but that should not go unrecognized. Is that all we've been talking about? Is the freshman next to Julio Jones, and
1 catch, 3 yards.
Like
great defensive scheme
for the most part.
Yep. All right, so really great games. Congratulations to us for getting to watch all of it.
Yeah,
is where we're at.
And also real fast, anytime you see a game with this much talent in it, one team goes down the field and scores on their opening drive, and then the same personnel comes out on defense and holds them, or basically, if it's 7-0 like it was, that's the sign of really, really good coaching. That is on the fly adjustment and a tremendous amount of processing and implementing. From Ohio State offensive drive 2 through 5 are
totally shut down.
Adjustment, and they did a really good job with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought it was a great game, worthy of a semifinal. I thought the other game was a great game, worthy of a semifinal. Here, it
was punchy.
Yes, it was very fun. Both of them were very physical. That ultimately this conversation is going to end up with Marcus Freeman giving us something to talk about with Brian Kelly. But I do want to go back to that one quick, because I know we're going to spend some time in the offseason on this, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But that whole idea of a team that's just loaded with talent. There's plenty of Georgia teams, Alabama teams, Texas teams, Ohio State teams, USC teams that recruit at an elite level that just miss out on previous structures of the format of the playoff. And now they're going to have an opportunity to sort of right all those wrongs. And I think that you're going to get a lot of champions like that. Not a lot, but like Ohio State this year. Do you have just beginning moments of this conversation that's much larger in the offseason? I'm okay with it. I don't have a problem with a team that, you lose to your arch rival at the end of the year. Any other year, any other format, that eliminates you. But we have a new format now, and I don't think it devalues the regular season at all. I think it actually includes more teams. But I understand if somebody says, I just don't like it when an elite roster of players can sort of fix itself and come back and gets a second chance. Where are you at on that story that's going to be told, I think, more times than people realize in the new era?
Why are people mad about this?
Okay, so I'm not. So I'll take a guess at why people are like that. My guess is that in the previous formats, people valued perfection or something close to perfection, and that striving for that was sort of the point. And if you screw up, you screw up, and that was your chance. And I think over time, in my opinion, we have learned very quickly, at least I did years ago, that the 0 is not automatically better than the 1 in the loss column. There's so much other stuff going into that. And now it sort of feels like, well, the 2 is not automatically, worse than the 1. And I don't think people like the talent recruiting ranking, portal ranking thing where you can just go, this team's got elite players. It's a really talented team. It didn't come together at the right time, and so they don't win a championship. Well, now they can come back and win a championship. So I think I see both sides of the argument.
Yeah, more of them can. Yeah, it's not absolute. It's not a binary. More of them can, provided they don't lose with enough, frequency. I have a hard time because a lot of the people who are griping about Ohio State losing to Michigan and then going on this run are a lot of the people who are, I'm 15. I've been screaming for a playoff since the late 80s. Now, yes, absolutely. A lot of the people who are complaining about this were also the same people saying, like, well, Georgia should have been in the playoff last year.
Last year? Yeah. Well, right. That makes no sense. Yeah.
If they got in, you're right. They probably would have made a lot of hay. And I mean, honestly, they probably would have looked better than Bama did in that Rose Bowl.
Yep.
And it may have won a third national title. Absolutely. But they lost the last time they played. That's exactly what happened to Ohio State.
I agree with your point, which is that I believed
Georgia. A lot of people want to have it both ways.
I believe Georgia. Total. In America, no. I think Georgia belonged in last year. I didn't really have a place to put them. Personally, I couldn't take anybody out justifiably so. But I think they would have won the whole thing, at least gotten to the championship against Michigan. But I think Georgia was maybe the best team. I think 2015 Ohio State, they lost to Michigan State on a last-second field goal in which the kicker ran all over the field celebrating, which is great. But that 2015 Ohio State team was better than Michigan State. And if they would have gotten into the tournament, they would have played a much tougher game against Alabama than Michigan State did. So I think we can go back and look at these teams and say, are we okay with those types of teams? Again, I'll go all the way back to 98, first year of the BCS. Andy Katzenmoyer, they lose to Jeff Smoker and Michigan State. How about those names? And that team was better than the Florida State team that played Tennessee. And if 98 Ohio State was undefeated, it would have been undefeated Tennessee and undefeated Ohio State. They were the two best teams in the country that year, and we would have learned officially who was better. And that's my opinion. And so I think a lot of teams are like that in college football that just there's lots of Oklahoma teams that just barely missed out. There's lots of teams.
But these formats are flawed, and they always will be. I'm only laughing because I never dreamed that I would hear the words Jeff Smoker, because yesterday I got a smoker this fall and didn't really use it much because I've been very busy. And then I was eating with our family, or the kids were asking, like, when are we going to use the smoker again? I was talking to my wife about it, and I was like, really soon. And I was like, we got to give it a name because my 4-year-old's into naming
Jeff?
everything. And I was like, I was like, well, I'm going to tell you right now, his name, like, I instantly said it, was like, his name is Jeff Smoker in honor of a Michigan State quarterback that none of you are alive to know about. And my wife's like, did he play in the NFL? Like, why? And I was like, oh, no, he played for Michigan State. I don't care. I was just like, but the smoker's name is Jeff Smoker.
The fact that
there was a quarterback named Jeff Smoker, and I was like, oh yeah, he played for like 13 years, by the way.
Dude.
And I was like, no one's going to talk about Jeff Smoker. And then you brought it up, and I was like, holy shit. 2 days.
This is what happens to our brains, though, when you've been around college football this long. Two days in a row, you've talked about Jeff Smoker. Who knows in 2025? Yeah. In 2025. But anyway, I just want to. I think that I think a lot of folks, to your point about sort of wanting it both ways, I think a lot of folks are going to have to grapple with this new dynamic of the new format, of which all of the formats have been flawed by. Oh, I agree. So
I got a question for you. This came up in an editorial review, and it wasn't 50-50 in the room with the Post, but it was like, I kind of had to explain my way out of it. I wrote a piece about this phenomenon of Ohio State losing its last game, going on the tear, saying it's a first of its kind, because you'll never be able to separate what I thought 2 weeks ago was the inevitable national champion from their completely unwarranted, unexpected, not undeserved, but like stupid loss to their painful arch rival, et cetera, et cetera. I was like, this never happened in college football. This is part of the NIL era. It's part of the 12-team playoff that they can even survive and do this, and all this kind of stuff that we've already talked about on the show. My editor came back, even like as it's going to publish, he's like, do you want to include a caveat there's an Alabama team. I just lost the time. It's 17 Alabama, because they go in, they lose to Auburn.
We talked about this on the show last week.
I know, but I'm still. I don't think that's the same thing.
So you want your opinion is
and it's relevant because you're asking me, well, hey, people are mad about this.
Okay.
I'm thinking, well, maybe it's already happened and they didn't process it. Or
so the reason I can argue both sides of it. So basically I'm on both sides of your 50-50 argument here. Yeah. First of all, I think the argument for it is that it's an arch rival in the final game of the regular season. And something happened to Saban that doesn't really happen, which is a double-digit loss. Like it wasn't as close. Auburn kind of like physically out-battled that Alabama.
Not a kick six moment.
Exactly.
Not a Hail Mary.
To me, those are the elements that I would say are similar to the Ohio State team. The difference is that was the team's only loss. They were undefeated going up to that, and I think we've largely been more accepting of a single loss than the second loss, right? Even if the first loss for this Ohio State team was on the road against number 1 in the final play of the game. So lots of context there. They also then came back and so they didn't play in the championship game, which is the same. So there's another argument for the SEC championship game.
Yeah. Auburn goes and loses to Georgia.
They dominate number 1, though, in the playoff game, much like Ohio State did to Oregon. So I
score that game
24-6. That was Kelly Bryant, and Clemson didn't cross midfield or anything. They dominated that game in Atlanta, in New Orleans, and then they come back and play the overtime game against Georgia. I actually see, not to agree with your 50-50 editorial board, but I do see the similarities. I also can parse out the differences. So
yeah, there's just something about this Ohio State team. I think my argument was they weren't that Ohio State team before, and people have gone back and forth with me on that. I think there were shades of it.
Yeah, one loss feels different than 2, though. In the old era, 2 losses never one time from 98 to 2023, the BCS and the 4-team era. Only one time as a 2-loss team.
Yeah, they're out.
They're out. So I think that's the difference. Probably is the second loss.
I think the reality is that we're all doomed as media fans, supporters of the sport, whatever. The format has changed so much and will probably continue to tweak and change so much that the contextual comparative analysis stuff is just there's always going to be a caveat where
it's so different.
Maybe feel like we've never done it before, but spiritually it's the same. And I kind of think that's what we're witnessing now. So,
and that's kind of always been,
or Notre Dame pulls a huge upset. Who knows?
That's exactly. That's all college football history though, because you have so many different communities and so many different teams with so many different identities and brands that it's very hard to say this Oregon thing is the same as this Ole Miss thing, and this South Carolina thing is the same as that Iowa thing, and this Maryland thing is the same as that Tennessee thing. It's very hard to compare all those things.
So so spoiler alert, but it's January 11th. When we launched Who Killed College Football, of course, everyone kind of on their face was like, "Oh, they did."
Get Ryan Nanny's say Ryan Nanny's name, because you've already said Spencer Hall and Holly Anderson. I'll promote Jason Kirk coming up in a little bit, so just go ahead and get them all in there, okay?
No. Well, I mean, Who Killed Ryan did it with me. Oh, it's ours.
I know.
We did Who Killed. That was it. What you just said is the secret thesis statement of the whole thing, which was that we knew, and we talked about it in the very beginning of the season on this show, a lot of people felt a different type of way about where the sport was going. They felt unsure. They felt a lot of anxiety. Now, if you're an SEC fan, you don't necessarily feel boxed out the way like a K-State or Virginia Tech fan would, or Boise or whatever. But you definitely felt weird about the way things are going. This is kind of strange, whatever. So what we did was take the most extreme example, and we had all these voicemails from people who called in and were I don't like the sport anymore. It feels like it's wrong. I was and then we took Nick Saban's comments about how this isn't the sport I coached. But I think the secret is exactly what you just said. That's the sort of spoiler that we arrive at after, I don't know, something like 12 hours of audio, is you're kind of in a constant state of mourning. Because if you are locked into a particular moment of college football. So if you're Alabama right now,
like an era,
never going to be like that again.
Yeah.
If you're Nebraska,
well, they probably said that after Bear though too, and then it was again. So you never know.
But it wasn't exactly 5 minutes between Bear Bryant and Nick Saban.
No, it wasn't. Yeah, there was a trip to Floribama in there.
No, they'll be back one day. No. Yeah. No, I'm not saying like you're dead for it. No, that's my point. Is I'm saying the format and the identity of the sport changed so damn much then that change becomes the actual constant.
Yeah.
I like that Bo's just in the chat right now as we're in the middle of this like
Notre Dame.
He's just like, man, fire on the under. I'll take the under. Notre Dame is a good defense.
Eddie's like,
oh, what is the over under?
Eddie, I think it's like 45. Eddie says, is taking Ohio State alternative spread plus 20 to be bold seems like a decently risky play. I don't disagree with that, actually. Unfortunately, I have preconceived confirmation bias around Notre Dame in this game. That's more about Ohio State than it is about Notre Dame. So that's a perfect segue here to Marcus Freeman. Go to ML Rose, of course. 6 great locations in Middle Tennessee and Nashville, Tennessee. Great burgers, great craft beer menu, great drink specials on Saturdays and Sundays. Great place to watch NFL football playoff games right now. And, of course, the national championship coming up 2 Mondays from now between Notre Dame and Ohio State. The first time the SEC has not gone to the championship game in back-to-back years since 04 and 05. So that's of note for you SEC fans. I do want to point out one more time, based on give you SEC fans some ammunition as you are taking it on the chin, rightly so, from Big Ten people right now who are, in fact, celebrating the fact that it's an all-Midwest championship game, which I don't believe has ever happened. So they are celebrating. They have the right to celebrate. To the victors go the spoils. But let me give you some ammunition that should allow you to maybe put out one of the myths that I am most frustrated by as a media member who loves paying attention to like nerdy media stuff. And that is the people that are most happy about a Notre Dame Ohio State matchup in the national championship are the people Big Ten fans claim are doing everything in their power to help the SEC, which they are, but not on the football field. ESPN cares about its bottom line. It cares about revenue. It cares about money over everything else. And you know who makes a lot of money with Ohio State and Notre Dame, giant brands and fan bases playing for the first time in a national championship game? Not Fox, ESPN. ESPN is so happy. They don't give 2 shits about who plays in the national title game if it's Ohio State and Notre Dame making them a lot of money. That's all they care about.
Yeah, so, they would care if it was Clemson again.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I made that joke like 100 times.
Yes, and Alabama doesn't make any money anymore. I know it's a big brand, but like people, like it's not the same as this. This is so different and new, and it brings in huge, enormous alumni bases in the Midwest, where almost all the TV sets are in this country. Excuse me. I get very frustrated by the ESPN is biased towards the SEC for other reasons, for money reasons, not for, oh, we're trying to get Ole Miss into the tournament reasons. Like Ole Miss doesn't make them money. Notre Dame makes them money. So I just want to point that out, and I want to throw that out because I bet you ratings. I don't think it's going to.
Yeah, it's hard to parse.
I don't think they're going to come close. So the record I think is 33.5 million people watched the very first one, Oregon versus Ohio State. Also, ironically, not any SEC teams, but I think that was number one. That's the record. Last year was about 25 million. I bet you this one comes close to the record. I bet you it gets upwards of 28, 29, 30 million viewers. I bet you it comes close.
I would tend to agree because it's the nation's largest program against the nation's largest capacity program. The difference is that there are people who will not watch college football at all in any way, shape, or form unless Notre Dame is involved, and then they will dip in for the first time in a long time. And those people tend to reside in large DMAs, Northeastern Block, I-95, Chicago, all those kind of places. So that feels like I don't like parse sports media watch or anything, but yeah, I feel like it's gonna pop a really big number. Quarters might suck because it might get bad fast.
You're on the same Ohio State lay the points bandwagon.
I think
I am too.
I mean, like
I am bummed about that, but that is what I think.
I have enjoyed watching all 3 Notre Dame games casually, like not as a partisan or what. I
totally agree.
Like, oh man,
they're fun to watch. Marcus Freeman is fun.
Yeah, no, they definitely are. But I'm also like, oh god, don't stick your hand in that garbage disposal. And that's kind of where we're at with Ohio State. So,
make sure you unplug it under the sink first.
Yeah.
Which I never do. Of course.
Breaker off. So I definitely think that the quarters might suffer a little bit, but I think that also ESPN has a way of manipulating viewership, as all of the big networks do. That like it'll be fine. I'm not really sweating that. Conspiratorially, don't ever be stupid enough to think the Big Ten or the SEC is dead or dying or out.
Of course not.
It's a 2-year deal right now. That's fine. Texas could have scored a touchdown and changed the complexion of that really quickly.
Yeah.
And then you would have had a very, very even Texas Notre Dame game. So who knows? Georgia could have won last year, as you said. I don't really worry. I wouldn't think in those terms. There's a way to
I just mean the ESPN.
No, not you.
Yeah, okay. I'm just talking about the bias thing where
there's to foment that to make a lot of television programming because it's cheap and easy to appeal to the emotional identity of, oh, it's the North, it's the South, it's the Midwest. And like I poke with the people who do that. I told every Big Ten person this, and I'll tell the SEC people this. Like the Empire will strike back.
Oh yeah, yeah. I got a lot of Big Ten friends texting me last night about oh, where's your boy Paul? Where's Paul at on all this? And I'm like, guys, you know who's gonna use this and do really big ratings because the SEC has been eliminated? Paul Feinbaum. His show, he's gonna. People don't get this. Like, it's not about the winning or the losing or getting into the tournament or not. It's about the story having a gravitational force to it.
They kind of needed this.
And the SEC getting eliminated Paul's not angry about that. He doesn't give a shit. You know what he cares about? His own pockets, his own radio show's ratings. And you know how you get ratings? Anger, enragement, people being pissed off about something. It's not bad for him at all.
Well, you need a new story. I think that's the biggest thing is you need a new story. And I think the SEC gets a new story to tell that, look, no storytelling 101, basic arc of a comedy or a drama or whatever is that you have to have stakes and you have to have transitional change and you have to have things affect. It can't just be like this the whole time. And the SEC won 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4 every national title. And this is because I screamed about it for years that if this kept up with total SEC dominance, and it was genuinely Alabama and Georgia every year, it was going to hurt the sport.
It did.
It is good for it is very good for the sport because yes, it's 2 Midwest teams, but one is always and always will be defined nationally because it's built by a religion and not a state.
And a snowstorm.
And the other one
and a snowstorm. As we sit here in a snowstorm in Nashville right now.
And
the other reason Notre Dame's in the Midwest is because of the snowstorm.
But this is also the other team is the largest fan base. It is the largest brand in the sport.
If you don't believe, Eddie says this, if you don't believe Kirby is cooking something devious in the lab right now, it's incredibly naive. To your point about the Empire striking back, the reason Ohio State is this good right now, the reason they had the $20 million payroll and were taking Caleb Downs and Judkins from the SEC is because they were tired of the SEC thing. Like Urban Meyer, when he went to Ohio State, he famously got like SEC-ified recruiting in that conference. We can argue if that's good or bad.
They hated him.
But they hated the fact
hated him for it. Yeah.
He was breaking all these gentlemen's agreements and blah, 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 blah. And SEC fans were like, what are you talking about, gentlemen's agreements? What are you talking about? I would knife my sister in the back. Yeah, I would knife my sister in the back for a 5-star quarterback. Brian Kelly might as well. We'll get to that in a second. All right, so Marcus Freeman makes Notre Dame likable, which is crazy. Ryan Day, I actually think, has been on this weird arc. Talk about a story. I think there's now some likability with him on non-Ohio State fans. I don't think Ohio State as a program is very likable. I don't think Notre Dame as a program is very likable for SEC fans in particular. But I do believe Marcus Freeman is the if you are an unbiased sort of casual observer and a fan of another team, I don't know how you're not rooting for Marcus Freeman in Ohio State or Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is the more likable team, the more likable everything. And I think I think which is really hard to do to make Notre Dame that likable. But I think Marcus Freeman has done it, which then, of course, brings us.
You're following Brian Kelly,
and it brings us to Brian Kelly. James Franklin, of course, 1-18 against top 5 teams, 13 straight losses to top 5 teams. Obviously, top 5 teams are very good, so they're hard to beat. Marcus Freeman, 33-9 in his years, 5-1 in the postseason. James Franklin, a lot of folks said, he was. I don't think he had any major moments of problem, by the way, managing that game. I thought being aggressive in that final drive was the right decision. Drew Aller just made a really bad decision, which is a bummer because he looked real sad about it. But just a lot of folks saying, look, James Franklin, not the biggest winner in this game. Brian Kelly, the biggest winner in this game. And Brian Kelly has had 7 straight 10-win seasons.
Biggest loser?
Yeah, biggest. Sorry, did I say winner? I meant loser. Yes.
Winner.
He had 7 consecutive 10-win seasons. He has a 7th-rated recruiting class, 5th-rated recruiting class the last 2 years at LSU. He's been to the national championship game with Notre Dame in 2012, 2 playoff appearances with Notre Dame in 18 and 20. He won a Heisman Trophy with the greatest offense, one of the greatest offenses ever assembled in LSU history, saying a lot considering some of those good offenses. He's 29-11 at LSU, 17-7. He's a really good coach. He's not great. He's not great, but he's a really good coach. But his quote about something along the lines of, I just want to be somewhere where I have the resources to compete for a national championship. Now, if Marcus Freeman gets blown out, I do think this discussion carries a little less weight because Ohio State with athlete, Ohio State with guy that Notre Dame has not yet recruited in 35 years, will do the same thing to Marcus Freeman that happened to Brian Kelly in 2012. So I want to know what you think of how all of this reflects Marcus Freeman likability, not yelling at his players in a loss to Florida. I'd like to know how all of this reflects on Brian Kelly because I know where you stand on Brian Kelly.
So I wrote about this for the Post going into the semis after the Georgia game, and had to kind of really couch it because you got to be careful that Notre Dame fans will come out of the woodwork, and they are not the most like recently informed individuals because they do sort of think in the context of like
Frank Leahy
centuries and millennia instead of like what's happened in the last 5, 10, or in my case,
Jesus ran the triple.
I wrote it just post 1988. Last time you were in spitting distance of this thing, and then what Kelly did. And I just said, look, there's no such thing as regardless of the fact that the last time they won a title was 88, there is not going to be a parade in South Bend, especially if you get their ass kicked next Monday. However, they have proven Brian Kelly wrong. However, with a little bit of an asterisk, I don't know if all of this stuff shakes out the way it does. Had Brian Kelly been aware of I don't know if he saw the horizon correctly, because to watch, I was watching the sideline the other night, and Brady Quinn is walking around in a, $5,000 suit on the sideline because he is running one of the most effective NILs in the country right now at a school that already creates that can credibly boast turning football players into CEOs and executives, and if nothing else, just people with really good financial sector jobs. We've seen that pushed a lot out of Notre Dame. The idea, and I was going through some Pete Sampson stories. I'm not saying he's carrying what I think he's a great reporter. I was saying
he's a good reporter.
He's great. He's great. Yeah. In fact, if I'm sort of looking for a Notre Dame thing, that was probably the first person I'm going to look at.
I've known Pete for 20 years. He's a great guy. So
I was going back to some of the stuff that he wrote about recruiting in the last offseason cycle with Freeman. And it's like, yeah, it does help that we're going to pay you, and NIL is going to pay you at other places. We're going to also teach you, like set you up for success, literally, because they're bringing in financial advisors, and I don't know if Brian Kelly would have left had he known all this was coming. However, another asterisk on top of my third asterisk, Braden.
Triple, however.
I think they were sick of him. And I think you cannot separate the success currently on the field, the physical, talented, schematic success that you saw from Notre Dame against Penn State, against Georgia, against Indiana, against USC, however you want to define it. And you can't separate that you can't separate that from Freeman, his recruiting ability, his innate recruiting ability. And then, guess what? I'm going to use the biggest cliche in the world because there couldn't be a bigger freaking difference. It was a culture change. It really, really was a culture change. I can't think of a greater swing than going from Brian Kelly to Marcus Freeman.
No, I can't either.
Ever.
And again, like it's like factually, it is impossible to argue that, because I hear a lot of what happens in sports talk radio land, and this, everything gets reduced down to you're the greatest that's ever happened or you suck. Like there's no middle ground. There's no nuance anymore in our conversations, especially on radio. But you cannot argue that Brian Kelly is not a pretty darn good coach. He's a pretty good coach.
No, I think it's even funnier because Kelly is so want to do the things that kill his public equity. So he's
yelling
at visibly combative with his players, and he's shitty in the media and all these things. And the problem, he's poisoning his own well, because I do think if you take a big step back and look at what Notre Dame was defined by that era of college football, he didn't do a bad job.
He did a great job.
He pulled off something that you very rarely see, which is they cratered. They went 4-7,
4-8,
and he pulled 4-8. Sorry, and they pulled him back.
Yeah,
he brought them back at multiple double-digit win seasons after that.
He went 4-8, changed his whole sort of spiel, nicer, calmer Brian Kelly, which sure.
But he should have, honestly.
But then went 10 wins in a row, 7 straight years after that.
Yeah.
Like that's. But I hear you. And I don't necessarily always blame. Like, I don't always side with the player on a sideline snafu or sideline debate. Like, sometimes, look, young people are not immune for being assholes also, right? Like,
sure, yeah.
There's plenty of annoying asshole young people in this world. See America. But I do think that, a coach is held to a different standard. It's like a parent with a kid. Like, you have to be the calmest voice in the room because you have to be the parent. And I think to some degree, Brian Kelly has done better at that in his older age in the last 7 years. But has not. It still creeps up. Like, the real guy still comes out, and you're all of a sudden you're yelling at Kyron Lacey on the sideline or somebody else on the sideline or whatever. So
there's a comment in chat that Bo just dropped. He said Coach O was better than BK, and I know people are going to feel a lot of different ways about this. I did make a joke to a colleague. I said, "What's funnier?" And I'll just go ahead and put this out because I didn't think I was going to tell this joke publicly. What's funnier? Brian Kelly leaving Notre Dame before he realized the power of NIL. Or college football getting rid of Ed Orgeron before he could harness the power of NIL. And it's related because of the two programs. Like, you fired Ed Orgeron to get Brian Kelly after several people in the middle said no. I mean, look, I
don't think Ed Orgeron could have ever overcome his own shortcomings to maximize NIL to its. He'd be Mario Cristobal.
I think he'd be a better Mario Cristobal.
You think so?
Yeah.
Okay. That's fire.
I think the AD situation at LSU is not great, and it's also set up to look really, really great. Like, because they brought in the native son who had made these splash hires in multiple sports at big schools like A&M and Washington, and it just isn't working. And he's going to live and die with Brian. And the problem is this, Braden, they may be stuck. What if LSU becomes the SEC's Wisconsin? What if they're just
and they play in Lambeau next year? No, I think. No, I don't. I don't think that Coach O is like. I think Brian Kelly. He has a lot of shortcomings, a lot of flaws, and I think certainly the culture and the act rubbing thin, and like I think there's lots of stuff we can discuss. I think Brian Kelly is a serious football coach. I think Coach Orgeron is not a serious football coach. That's my diff. I don't think.
No, I always thought he was a serious football.
I don't think
coach.
it's even close.
I think Ed fell prey to his personality. I think he's a very good defensive coach. I mean,
he's
look,
a great defensive
2019 is one of the great. 2019 LSU is one of the greatest teams of the modern era.
No question. So, I think he needs to be. He's a great recruiting coordinator and D-line coach, which is his background, and I think that's what he is. I don't think he's more than that.
And but like you could say that about Dabo, or he's a great recruiting coordinator. He was a great assistant coach, and like he won 2 national titles.
All right, okay, that's the end of that.
Carson, I'm going to continue to laugh as we get out of here. My thesis conclusion is let's continue to laugh at Brian Kelly.
Fair. We can all do that. We can all agree to do that. Carson Beck, what does it tell me about Georgia? He goes to Miami. Certainly, it tells me that Miami's paying well. What does it tell us about Georgia?
I don't know yet. I could give you the talk radio answer, and obviously his girlfriend is down there, right? Like, there are some mitigating factors here. $4 million for Carson Beck for 1 year is insane. Yes. And I've been the player payment advocate louder than a lot of people ever. But you're paying $4 million for 1 year of Carson Beck. John Ruiz must be just like
nuts.
God, I mean, y'all manage your money.
But look, this is the beauty of college football. Always, Stephen. College football has always been millionaires working hard to make millions of dollars to waste it on football players way before NIL. Hey, our waterfall needs to be taller than the other guys. Hey,
looking at Carson Beck and thinking $4 million is insane to me. That's
No, I totally agree with you. I
don't know what it's about Georgia yet, but I'm anxious to find it. Yeah.
I will say about Miami though, they got almost all their offensive lines coming back. They've paid very handsomely for skill players around him, and Mario Cristobal will still be the problem.
Yep.
So it is what it is.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah. There's a timeout.
ML Rose, 6 great locations. 7th coming soon near me, actually. So I'm cool with that. My kids are excited about that. Wife's excited about that. Great place to watch games. Truly a great burger joint. They curate their taps too. They have some of the best beer menus in the entire city. Great drink specials on Saturdays and Sundays. So if you're watching NFL football, swing on by ML Rose. If you're coming into town to visit Nashville, come on in and make sure you swing by an ML Rose. You will not be disappointed. They got a great menu. It's a great hang. Love the vibes in there. Charlotte Avenue. We'll be over there watching some playoff games this weekend, so make sure you come on by. So brave the elements with us. We'll be over there. If you're on YouTube, please thumbs up, notifications turned on. If you're listening on a podcast app, please share the show with somebody. We do appreciate it. Congratulations to us for getting to watch great football games. Yes, the SEC is eliminated, but it's going to be okay. The Empire will strike back, as Godfrey has said. Otherwise, Ohio State, lay the points against Notre Dame is where I would tell people to go right now with a bunch of time. We'll have a preview of the game coming up a little bit later on this week, but otherwise, thanks for hanging out. We do appreciate it. You can follow Godfrey all over the internet at all of his places and websites and, different ventures all over the place. You can read them all over the place at 38 Godfrey as well. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out. Godfrey, good to see you, man. Are you get the kids out in the snow today?
Did yesterday. Over it now. Yeah. When
I was just texted that the police department has shut down the sledding on Shelby Park. That was our afternoon plan. We have gone sledding there for like 10 years now. We were there yesterday. It's one of the best places and now I'm gonna have to figure out what to do with these ridiculous children. So love you kids. Cool. Love you guys. All right. For Godfrey, I'm Braden. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. We'll talk to you guys next time. Peace and love.